Many decades ago, there was a neuroscientist called Dr. Michael Gazzaniga. He was young in his career, working under the guidance of his mentor, Dr. Sperry. They were trying to cure the most severe forms of epilepsy, and their treatment was surgical. They severed the communication bundle, the highway, between the two hemispheres, the left and the right, called the corpus callosum. And in doing so, they effectively halted the chaotic neurotransmission that was out of control. But what they did in the process is revealed some very strange phenomena that they would come to discover. One in particular called alien hand syndrome. And when I was studying this work and met Dr. Gazzaniga in person, he was giving a lecture at my university, I was so intrigued by it because when I watched the videos of the alien hand syndrome patients, who, yes, they survived the surgery just fine. Yes, their epilepsy was cured, but they were also apparently inhabited by sometimes another person that wanted to smoke when they didn't want to smoke, that reached for light switches in the wrong places, that would pick out clothes that the person driving the avatar that identified as Jane Doe, for example, didn't want to wear. It was like the hand had a mind of its own. How is this possible? How does somebody have another conscious being inside of them that is revealed when you do a surgery like this? Is it fully conscious? Is it alive? Does it have a name? Hey, there's so many questions that come up as a result of this. Do you have one? Do I have one? Now fast forward years into my spiritual awakening and exploration of the consciousness expansion journey. And I have observed some interesting data points that I don't fully know how to put together yet. So I'm just going to give you the little pieces of them, and maybe it'll be meaningful to you, and maybe not. Maybe it'll be scattered like it is for me right now, because I don't know how the bigger picture fits together just yet. But Abraham Hicks talks about this rocket of desire shooting out whenever you are triggered or somebody is triggered by an antecedent, a stimulus in the environment or an emotion or something that causes this desire to happen. So you could observe something and this triggers this rocket that launches up to somewhere and creates this manifestation process that begins, and it's completely natural and automatic. And yet I guess Abraham is probably genderless, but speaking through Esther Hicks, they talk about the inner being guiding you. And sometimes I wonder, is that the inner being that has a mind of its own, desires of its own, that was revealed in those split brain patients? And Abraham Hicks talks about this as a benevolent being. So I think probably not, because some of the patients actually had antagonistic beings inside of them that were forceful and angry and I seem to recall one was even a little bit on the edgy side and like hitting the person if it didn't obey, which is kind of weird. I think there was a B horror movie in the 90s about that, played by an actor named Bruce. I can't remember. Anyway, it's about this hand that's out of control that has a mind of its own, and it's comical, but I digress. So I don't think that this is the inner being that Abraham Hicks is talking about, unless there are different flavors of them. People also say that drinking spirits causes entity attachments. And I happen to disagree with them, because I actually believe that this shows you what's under the hood. It's kind of like doing split brain surgery and seeing all of the facets of the subconscious mind that come out. And oftentimes people keep a lid on who they really are inside. And deep, deep inside, we all have different layers to us. So it's not like they're completely fake. It's just that they're presenting the top layer, the business layer, the friend layer, and then they go home and they raise holy hell. And sometimes you actually see that people are really, really affectionate and gregarious and become the life of a party. And they're buttoned up on the surface. That's like their everyday personality. This is kind of like what astrology is talking about with the antecedent. I'm sorry, not the antecedent, but the ascendant, where you have your outwardly facing persona, yourself. And then you have all of these deeper parts of you. And somewhere in there is a being that guides us, according to Abraham Hicks, and is a deeper person that comes out if we drink too much, which could be raising holy hell, being the life of the party, or being an affectionate love bug. Humans are complex. We are very, very complex. But another thing that stands out to me is this idea of soul contracts. Because when I started to understand how people could be so misaligned in their subconscious desires and what they were feeling at a deep level versus how they were behaving, it really struck me as odd. Because I met two in particular soul contracts that were very, very powerful, that were stuck in a 3D behavior program that was keeping them tied to an old life and an old identity that was in stark contrast to how they were really feeling, and where their soul was really trying to take them. And this causes pronounced pain and confusion for all parties, actually. I remember one in particular that was hiding who they really were. I saw them as like a beautiful peacock where they could entertain an entire room full of people and dance around, everybody laughing, and yet inside there was almost this suffering child that was masking who they really were and how different they really were. And they had constructed this beautiful persona to fit in, but actually it was hollow. and I only observed them from afar. And I could see into them. I mean, we were close. I knew them, but I wasn't part of these gatherings. That's what I mean. I was like walking by, an observer, seeing a different side of them, and seeing this disconnect in the person that I sat with under the moon, having a certain type of conversation and connecting with them at a deeper level, more profound level. And the person that would engage in petty gossip or backstabbing behavior, because that's what the social level was of that particular arrangement of gathering souls, people. Everybody's on the journey at different points, and there's no judgment. It's just that I watched them transform and become likable. And I watched them lie to gain approval of people that may not even think of them years later. It's interesting how we do these things, but what is profoundly interesting to me, more so, is that there can be an entire river of emotions under our social dynamics that are buried, and like a torrential wave pulling us in one direction. We can have at the surface, or in our behavior, in our decisions, a complete opposition, a fragmentation. We can actually choose to arrange our life, surround ourselves with people who are not even great fits for us, that deep down we somehow know this because our soul is telling us this, because it's yearning and magnetized in a different place, in a different direction. And sometimes we're frightened of that. I know for me, in those soul connections that were very, very powerful, but there was almost this hiding, denying, repressing, minimizing, or ignoring reactions, and myself included, because I didn't know what I was getting myself into. It was kind of new for me, and I needed some time to process it. And my instinctual reaction is to withdraw and to do that solo. So as a result, I can rebuff. And that's just an instinctual, just creating space, pushing away, and spending some time on my own to figure things out. And they had their own version of that. So what happened is that we moved on with our lives. And the feelings that we had were largely buried. They were actually just buried. And we chose different people. I don't even talk to them anymore. And so when we have this disconnect between what our soul is longing for and who we identify with on the surface and the identity that we're operating with in the world, it creates this pulling in different directions. It makes me wonder, do we, in those situations, have a being inside of us? If we were an alien hand or a split brain patient, would we have like the alien hand syndrome, where one hand is trying to text some person from the past that we're like, there's nothing there. What's going on? The subconscious can reveal itself in vulnerable moments. And I remember that one of those soul partners, there was very strong magnetism, but every time that we would try to get together, one of us would feel too afraid and would cancel or try to postpone. I usually tried to postpone and they would cancel. Except for one time, they had apparently had a lot to drink. And they called me at like 2 or 3 in the morning to come over, which would have been very, very unusual, considering that the level of our surface friendship was not where that would have been socially acceptable, meaning it would have been an awkward morning. But the subconscious desire was there. Alien hand calling somebody in the middle of the night. I didn't pick up. I was asleep. So, this disconnect, this wanting something that the person that's driving doesn't approve of. Like if you watch some of the videos of the split brain patients, it's remarkable because you'll see them, the alien hand actually doing things without the person's consent. Where does this come from? How does this come? This is an unresolved question that I have. But what I have observed is that throughout the awakening process, there is a unification. And so lately, what I have experienced in meditation is almost as though my subconscious mind is receiving a recoding. And I'll get downloads or little glimpses. And this is the type of meditation that's right on the edge of sleep, which is a really tricky meditation to intentionally do, but is actually quite meaningful, profound when it happens. And I try to get glimpses of what's happening under my hood. And I very rarely remember exactly what is going on, like the pictures, the images, or the insights, because sometimes it's direct messages. Sometimes it's a language, sometimes it's emotions, it's landscapes without words. And this allows whatever subconscious mechanism that I believe is related to my intuition, which is a subconscious mechanism, to guide me. And I have actually, throughout my experience, found out that at least my internal being, I can trust it. And it knows a lot more than I do, the me that's driving my car. And the gap between us is diminishing, meaning I am almost fully integrated, almost fully whole. And it's interesting to see the fragmentation of people, which actually seems to be more common than I think many of us talk about, leading me to believe that perhaps many of us, especially those who are fragmented in their desires and their behaviors, have a being inside of them. and somebody different driving the car.